Greetings and welcome to compliance training for Tyler Junior College faculty and staff, the Americans with Disabilities Act. This course is for compliance training purposes only. Any and all legal questions should be directed to the TJC Human Resources Department. The Americans with Disabilities Act is the world's first comprehensive civil rights law for people with disabilities. It is divided into 5 titles: employment, public services, public accommodations, telecommunications, and miscellaneous. Tyler Junior College gives equal consideration to all applications for admission, employment, and participation in its programs and activities without regard to disability. Tyler Junior College respects the legal rights of each person to work and learn in an environment that is free from unlawful harassment based on disability.
This historic act is the world's first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. The first. I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disability Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down. God bless you all.
I really believe that people with disabilities are the greatest untapped resource in this country today.
The ADA has given us the right to travel the sidewalks and streetscapes of our country.
The ADA was the critical linchpin of changing things, and now it's an ongoing process of using it to try to create these kinds of changes.
ADA's done just fantastic things for people that are blind, people in wheelchairs, getting up public transportation.
A disability is defined in the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as a mental or physical impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities. Learning is an example of a major life activity. If you have a mental or physical condition, a history of such a condition, or a condition which may be considered by others as substantially limiting, you may have a legally defined disability. Under Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the college must give equal consideration to all applicants for employment without regard to disability. Employers must provide reasonable accommodations to a disabled person who is qualified and otherwise capable of performing their job-related tasks. Reasonable accommodations might include quiet workspace, handicapped accessible parking, visual or auditory enhancing equipment. The law also provides freedom from discrimination and protection against unlawful harassment based on disability.
The goal of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA for short, is to give those with disabilities the same opportunity for employment and benefits as everyone else. Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 prohibits private employers, state and local governments, employment agencies, and labor unions from discriminating against qualified individuals with disabilities in job application procedures, hiring and firing, advancement, compensation, job training, and other terms, conditions, and privileges of employment. An individual with a disability is a person who has a record of or is regarded as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. A qualified employee or applicant with a disability is an individual who, with or without reasonable accommodation, can perform the essential functions of the job in question, Reasonable accommodations are adjustments or modifications provided by an employer to enable equal employment opportunities for people with disabilities. This may include, but is not limited to, rearranging facilities or modifying equipment, modifying examinations, training materials and policies, and providing qualified readers or interpreters. Remember, accommodations vary depending upon the needs of the individual applicant or employee. Not all people with disabilities or people with the same disability will require the same accommodation. An employer is required to make reasonable accommodation to the known disabled qualified applicant or employee if it would not impose an undue hardship on the operation of the employer's business. Undue hardship is defined as an action requiring significant difficulty or expense when considered in light of factors such as an employer's size, financial resources, and the nature and structure of its operation. Additionally, the ADA's non-discrimination standards apply to federal sector employees under the Section 501 of the Rehabilitation Act, as amended, and its implementing rules. Title I of the ADA also covers medical examinations and injuries with regard to a disability and employers' responsibilities in certain drug and alcohol abuse situations. For instance, employers may ask applicants about their ability to perform specific job functions, but not about the existence, nature, or severity of a disability. A job offer may be conditioned on the results of a medical examination, but only if the examination is required for all entering employees in similar jobs. With limited exceptions, any medical information employers learn about an applicant or employee must be kept confidential. Information can be confidential even if it contains no medical diagnosis or treatment course, and even if it is not generated by a healthcare professional. An employee's request for reasonable accommodation would be considered medical information and is subject to the ADA's confidentiality requirements. However, employees and applicants currently engaging in the illegal use of drugs are not covered by the ADA when an employer acts on the basis of such use. Employers may hold illegal drug users and alcoholics to the same performance standards as other employees. Finally, it is also unlawful to retaliate against an individual for opposing employment practices that discriminate based on disability or for filing a discrimination charge, testifying, participating in any way within an investigation, proceeding, or litigation under the ADA.
Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 states, "No otherwise qualified handicapped individual of the United States shall, solely by reason of a handicap, be excluded from participating in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." The Act requires that academic institutions make reasonable accommodations and modifications to existing facilities, programs, and policies in order to ensure that all programs are physically accessible and that the student can participate effectively.
Valeska's story.
I wanted to go back to school because I felt called to help other people, to learn to stand on my own 2 feet, learn not to hold so much onto other people. I believed for many, many years that my learning disability was who I was. It was the first thing. Hello, my name is Valeska. I have a learning disability. That was it. Now, I am learning a new way to be. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. The name for it is dyscalculia. It manifests itself as a lack of organization. Organizational things are very difficult for me. At work, transitions are very difficult for me. When I have to move a group of kids from one place to another. Oh, can you sit up? Math is very difficult for me. In high school, social skills were very difficult for me. I have no memory of not having a learning disability. I pulled hair, other children's hair, when I was older than I should have been, like I should have known better. And my response was, well, it doesn't hurt me. I think that both my parents knew that there was something wrong or something different when I was a baby. My father once told me a story about a doctor who said to him that I would never graduate from college. This is like a 3-year-old. I know that that has made a huge difference in my life, that I had parents who were aware that there was something going on, that I had early intervention. High school was really hard. I was lonely. I would get teased. I just got angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier. I would do things to get out of class. Like I would kick someone else's chair. Something sort of minor that would annoy the teacher. I'd be asked to leave. Then I didn't have to deal with my peers. And I didn't have to deal with academics. And I didn't have to deal with, all those things, all that social stuff. I'd be in a room alone. Someone in a wheelchair doesn't go up the stairs, generally. So they find the elevator. The teacher's office, the principal's office was my elevator. It got me out of social situations. After high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. And so I went to the 2-year technical college for about 4.5, 5 years, and I flunked. I just didn't do well. I was just floundering around. I didn't have the skills to do the things that most people do, pay the bills, and I couldn't function. Although it did teach me that I needed help.
Interested in what we teach, early childhood education, people interested in working in the human services or the business area. Our students, when they leave, are eligible for the same licensing procedure as someone graduating with an associate's degree. Valeska worked at the ADAcc, which is one of the great schools. And then when she left, she got a job at Longwood Medical Center, the daycare center there, which is also a place that we've been using as an internship site for years and years.
I see. What color are they? When I was growing up, my parents did a lot for me. So I didn't know how to self-advocate until quite recently.
But that's the whole idea. You don't ask for help, then you just kind of flounder.
Yeah. Self-advocate in a way that doesn't make me look like, oh, here I am, the baby. Coddle me. In a way that says, look, I have this bunch of skills. I have these things that I can do. But I need assistance in this other thing.
The challenges of students leaving the program are the same challenges they have when they arrive here. You arrive here with a learning disability, you leave here with a learning disability. So you need to take all the tools that we've given you, because they're going to have to negotiate their way through the rest of the world. And it's an ongoing process for everybody in the world.
1 times 0 is 0, 1 time, so it would be 100.
Yeah.
My view of disabilities is that all disabilities are gifts, and if there's a reason that I went through that experience I did in high school, if my learning difference is a gift, I need to know how to use it. So that's why
for you to put that
I'm in school, to know how to use my gift.
The reality of Bridge to Terabithia would be your bomb in Gilead. That's great. Then
in English, something very interesting happened. It seemed like in every class, someone came up to me for help. Like, it went, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, do you know who you're asking? And then I realized that I could actually help people, other students. And that was kind of amazing. And what I did here, it's all choppy because for a long time I was defined. It was my identity, my disability. Now, I know that it is a part of me, but it's not me. I would like everybody to know that other people with differences or what have you, that it's not you.
The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 are very different, leading to miscommunication between college and high school staff who have studied only the statutes applying to their institution. For example, in high school, a student classified as learning disabled in a specific area, such as reading comprehension, may also receive special services in another area, such as math. In college, a student is only eligible to receive accommodations that are directly associated with a specific identified disability. In other words, accommodations listed in individual education plans, or IEPs, developed at a high school are not binding on a college or university. Higher education is legally obligated to the following: Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Civil Rights Restoration Act. The responsibilities of colleges include to protect a student's right to privacy and confidentiality, to provide access to programs and services, to inform students of office locations and procedures for requesting accommodations, to accept and evaluate verifying documentation, to determine, via that documentation, that an impairment causes a substantial limitation on a major life activity, to determine for students who are otherwise qualified for participation in the program or service whether a reasonable accommodation is possible, to make reasonable accommodations for students who meet the above criteria, to provide reasonable access to programs and services equal to those available to the general public, to suggest reasonable adjustments in teaching methods that do not alter the essential content of a course or program, to assure that off-campus and contracted program facilities also comply with Section 504 and the ADA, and to inform students of their rights and responsibilities. Colleges are not required to reduce or waive any of the essential requirements of a course or program. They are not required to conduct testing and assessment of learning, psychological, or medical disabilities. Colleges are not required to provide personal attendance, to provide personal or private tutors, although tutoring services normally available to persons without disabilities must be accessible to persons with disabilities who are otherwise qualified for those services. And finally, colleges are not required to prepare individual education plans or IEPs. Because of these differences, students and parents may have expectations which cannot be met. When in doubt, refer students to the Office of Disability Services.
Centaura's story.
A day in school for me is not really too different from the average student. You know, I do mostly the same things that other students do. I go to classes, I'm involved in activities. I've been doing a double major for early childhood education and psychology. I hope to one day be a kindergarten teacher in a public school system. I just like the general feel of the campus, a fairly flat campus. The other campus that I was accepted to was Framingham State, which was built on a hill. So I figured there would be problems getting around, especially in the wintertime. I get up and John is one of my friends. I met him at the Spanish Club. I met him 3 years ago already. We have been really good friends ever since. I was born with spina bifida. I have an anxiety disorder, which I've had for a couple of years. I was recently diagnosed with borderline personality disorder based on anxiety and depression, things like that. My parents really had a hard time accepting that I had a disability, and my dad, he had a hard time accepting disability. I think part of it may be cultural norms in India. So for me, being an Indian girl and then having a disability on top of it, I think was an extra thing to absorb. And a lot of that was channeled toward me for many years. As a student, it was very difficult living in a very dysfunctional environment on an everyday basis, and thus my grades had really suffered, and there was a point where people did not think I was going to graduate, but there was one person who constantly believed in me, who was the school psychologist. She never lost faith. There was also the school adjustment counselor, who in high school was a big help in terms of my transition from high school to college. Before I came here, I had met with the coordinator of disability resources and discuss what accommodations they had to offer. Okay, so we will need to do the reduced course load letter then next semester as well. Yes.
Well, what happens with the students such as Centaura once they've provided us with the documentation determining the disability that a student may have, whether it's physical, psychological, or learning disabilities? We would sit down with that student at the beginning of each semester and talk about the accommodations that would be appropriate for them. And we work together, and then we would then produce a letter to the professors with whom the student will be taking their classes. We might offer the services of a note taker in the classroom who would share their notes. Another example of an accommodation would be a priority registration, specifically for students who have physical challenges that they may need to have. They need to have accessibility and access into those classrooms, and perhaps a schedule that will meet their medical needs.
No. The accommodations that I asked for are note-taker services. I have slow graph motor skills. It's hard for me to listen and take notes at the same time. I also get extended time for my exams, which I take in what's called our Academic Achievement Center. And as far as interacting with the professors, it is still a little bit uncomfortable. I do still have a little bit of the shyness in me. But again, with the help of disability resources, they provide letters that explain everything. Without the accommodations, I would still be struggling in school. and I probably wouldn't be here today. Well, let's see. If I were talking to other kids who are facing similar issues, I would tell them, you know, it's very important to have a positive attitude, even though circumstances may be difficult. Management. And definitely, if you have supports, reach out for them. Which class are you taking in management?
We're always trying to get the word out that our office exists and we are here to help students with disabilities. And many students will choose to identify when they first come. A student may go to a professor and talk to them about their disability issues, and then they may get referred down here to us. We have advising staff who are also sensitive to picking up with students whether or not there might be a disability issue. But it's really up to the student to make that decision to identify here with us.
I have a feeling that biology, I have quite a few students in biology, that next semester I have a feeling it's going to be a challenge for all of us to get through it. For a long time I felt defined by my disability, and a lot of that had to do with my family having their problems with dealing with my disability, and also just society in general. When you have a disability, they tend to label you with, oh, that's a disabled person. I still have to show myself every day to the people out there, people even around this campus, that I am not a wheelchair. I'm the person in the wheelchair.
Disability services provide accommodations in counseling, community referrals, disability-related information, adaptive technology equipment, tutoring, and interpreter services for academically related disabilities. Reasonable and appropriate accommodations are reviewed and recommended on a student-by-student or case-by-case basis. Disability Services does not offer diagnostic testing, personal attendance, financial assistance, or scholarships. Accommodations are provided on an individual basis following presentation by the student and review by the college of documentation that confirms the presence of a disability that causes a substantial limitation as defined under Section 504 and the ADA. Appropriate and reasonable accommodations create an equal access to education, as long as it doesn't require substantial change in an essential element of the curriculum in class. This is determined by the Disability Review Committee. Accommodations are provided to address the needs of students who are or have deaf or hard of hearing, visual impairments, learning disabilities, and physical impairments. Captioning may be necessary and required to make audio and audiovisual information and communication accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing in a wide range of situations. Captioning may be required to provide access to educational programs and services in public and private higher education and other educational opportunities, and to provide access to information and communication in employment settings. Captioning may be required for pre-recorded and live presentations of audio and audiovisual material. Real-time captioning, or CART, may also be required to ensure effective communication with individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing in certain settings. The Internet is a new frontier in captioning. The law is generally clear that government agencies must make their websites accessible. The 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act expanded the scope of devices that must display captions to all video devices that receive or display video programming transmitted simultaneously with sound, including those that can receive or display programming carried over the Internet. TJC provides captioning services for video content you plan to use in your courses. contact Disability Services for assistance.
The web is an essential aspect of my ability to go to school. There are so many documents that are now available electronically that are posted on websites for my courses that I really probably couldn't go to school without it.
I use the internet for teaching, grading. Also, I use it for doing research to pull up information that I can look at. You know, of course, I use it for email. I mean, really, I use the internet for everything now.
Students, faculty, and staff in higher education need the web in order to be successful. But inaccessible websites can inhibit or severely restrict their participation in post-secondary settings.
It would take me 45 minutes to do an activity that it would take one of my classmates maybe 15 or 20. The site should be accessible. This is a higher ed thing. I should be able to use this. So why do I need a third party? Needing that person to push the buttons for me because the website is not accessible is not acceptable in my book.
The volume control was such that I simply could not adjust it. They were so sensitive and so small, there have been a couple of times I've just had to give up.
Oftentimes I have to go to somebody else around the office and ask for more information. And so that leaves me with a sense of dependence. But I think it ought to be more equitable, that I ought to have access to it whether they think it's important or not, just like everybody else does.
Inaccessible web content affects student experience and learning, faculty and staff productivity, and overall timeliness and efficiency. Institutions of higher education have an obligation to provide accessible web content from the beginning, and making after-the-fact accommodations alone are insufficient.
And there was no way, short of this experience, that I would have ever understood the discrimination and the need for assistive technologies and services and those kinds of things that are required, really.
People who don't have disabilities, I think it's probably hard for them to even relate. If you've got a disability, they act like there's a lot more than just a disability. They act like you're mentally incompetent, physically incompetent, and basically an incompetent person. We're real people. I can think, I've got good ideas, I can do productive things, and sometimes they just don't give you credit for that if they say you have a disability.
I can be equally as successful as any of my colleagues without disability. The fact that I need an accessible website or other accessibility tools doesn't diminish the value of my education or my potential. It just means that my success has to occur in a different way. And so I would encourage those watching this video not to assume that I can't, but to assume that I can.
Some institutions in higher education are embracing the need for change and implementing enterprise-wide accessibility.
I've noticed in the last little bit that the internet has really improved. The information that's available, the accessibility, the captions that are there, it's just far more accessible than it ever has been in the past. So it's much better than before.
I was able to connect with the Disability Resource Center here on campus. It was like utopia for me because I realized at that moment that made it easier for me to be equally as successful as my non-disabled peers.
It was very easy to go into the online catalog, check the boxes of what I was looking for, then enter my search terms, and just the fact that I could go in and use it was really great.
Accessible web content in higher education is critical if we're to ensure that all students, faculty, and staff are being given equal access.
Accessibility should be as important as the information you have on your site. You want as many people as possible to be able to view your site and utilize it. You should include that from day one.
What I want is equal use. You know, whether it's for deaf people, blind people, regardless of the disability, they ought to have access to the information that's there.
And I don't want people to feel badly for me, because I don't feel badly for me. But I do want to be able to have the same opportunities that individuals without disabilities have.
Is your institution's web presence accessible to all? The Goals Project can help. To learn more, visit ncdae.org/goals.
This concludes compliance training for the Americans with Disabilities Act. Please take the quiz to ensure you receive credit for this course.